They immediately say, no, 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 something is wrong with you. I got to impose sanctions on you. You're not right. You're not like me. But in Asia, we say, no, 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 no. I know you're very different. And I'm very different from you. But then we must understand each other. I mean, one of the worst things that the Anglo-Saxon media does is to constantly insult leaders. Xi Jinping, Putin, whoever, excuse me, who gave you the right to insult these leaders? Who? Who do you think you are? Because what it did was that it put the Western mind to sleep at precisely the time when Asia, especially China and India, were waking up. And, I'm shocked that very few Americans know, the 21st century will be very different from any of the previous centuries, recent ones, especially 19th, 20th century. As I said, the past 200 years, you had one dominant civilization, Western civilization. The 21st century will be characterized by what I call 3 M's. Multi-civilizational, multipolar, and multilateral, meaning you've got to have lots of meetings for people to resolve all these things. Now, the reason why you will have this multi-civilizational, multipolar, multilateral world is that you got to learn to deal with societies who are not like you at all, right? Who are the opposite of you. And, one reason why American diplomacy has run into a ditch and European diplomacy has run into a ditch is because as soon as they come across a society which is not like them, which is different from them, they immediately say, no, 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 something is wrong with you. I got to impose sanctions on you. You're not right. You're not like me. But in Asia, we say, no, 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 no. I know you're very different. And I'm very different from you. But then we must understand each other. I must understand what's important to you. And you must understand what's important to me. And then we figure out a solution whereby we can live with each other. Right? Now, that's something that's quite basic that most Western diplomats have stopped doing. Because whenever they have a problem, I give you a case. You have a problem country in Southeast Asia, it's Myanmar. It's going to take some time to resolve it. It's a wicked problem. But what does the West do? Whenever it's a problem, you impose sanctions. What do sanctions achieve? Nothing. Have sanctions ever changed any country? Never. So why don't you just continue talking to people, at the end of the day, trying to find a compromise solutions? And that, I think, is something that the Asians have developed that I think the West should come and learn from. Look, I'll give you a simple example. You have this Kosovo problem that you fought the war over, right? So you separated Kosovo from Serbia, NATO did, and then you have this independent territory which still can't get into the UN and has no status and so on and so forth. Indonesia had the same problem. It had a region called East Timor, which separated, right? So in theory, Indonesia and East Timor should now be at loggerheads, like Kosovo and Serbia. You know what? Indonesia and Timor-Leste love each other. I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah, sure.
The chief sponsor of Timor-Leste's admission into ASEAN is Indonesia. So, we are clearly doing some things right in Asia as a result of being very careful, pragmatic, and doing the best to treat each other with the utmost respect and never give condescending lectures or insult leaders. One of the worst things that the Anglo-Saxon media does is to constantly insult leaders. Xi Jinping, Putin, whoever, excuse me, who gave you the right to insult these leaders? Who? Who do you think you are? So this is a result of 200 years of cultural condescension from the 19th and 20th century, flowing into the 21st century, where it's going to hit a big hard wall and lead to many cracked heads in places like Europe. There's no question that if you are a young, aspiring individual who has, a lot of beans, you're like Satya Nadella, you're like Sundar Pichai. You can arrive as a young immigrant and do very, very well in the United States of America. There's no question. But at the same time, in terms of its foreign policy, unfortunately, the United States has been making more and more mistakes. And it's a good question to ask why that is the case. But one of the theories I'm developing is that in the Cold War, in one way or another, the Soviet Union acted as a major restraint on the United States, and the United States felt that it was in a real competition to win hearts and minds around the world. And American diplomats actually were in the Cold War very friendly, oozing with charm, and always trying to persuade you that, you know, the United States was on the right side of history, the Soviet Union was on the wrong side. And in a sense, you had American diplomats, American leaders making an effort to cultivate the world and get to know it. I can tell you, like, someone like George Shultz, the Secretary of State, would spend 3 weeks traveling all around the Asia Pacific region, and someone asking, why are you spending 3 weeks here? He says, I'm taking care of the garden. You got to spend time. You got to meet people. You got to hear them out. You got to understand what they think, and so on and so forth. So that was the nature of American diplomacy during the Cold War. But unfortunately, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union ended, I have absolutely no doubt that what brought America down was that America got drowned in hubris. And we all know the famous end of history essay. And the most damaging part of the end of history of essay was that it actually made those in the United States and the West feel, hey, we won. So from now on, the rest of the world has got to converge towards us and become like us, liberal democratic societies. And so they have to do all the adjustment adaptations. We have arrived, we don't have to change and adapt. And I spent a year in Harvard in 91, 92, immediately after the end of the Cold War. And I can tell you the sheer arrogance, complacency of everyone in the United States then was actually quite shocking. And I remember in a discussion with the very famous, a very good man, I must say, a very good man, Stanley Hoffman, one of the best professors in Harvard. And after a discussion on the state of the world, I said, by the way, you know, I don't think the future belongs to the West. I think, you know, Asia is returning, and the 21st century will be the Asian century. And he went almost apoplectic, you know, in his response. He couldn't believe that anyone would say that the West was not going to command history forever. But the fact that even a great intellectual citadel like Harvard could be consumed by such arrogance showed that, you know, the end of the Cold War did a lot of damage to the American mind, to the Western mind. Because what it did was that it put the Western mind to sleep at precisely the time when Asia, especially China and India, were waking up. And, you know, I'm shocked that very few Americans know that from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India, always. And so the past 200 years of Western domination of world history have been a major historical aberration. All aberrations come to a natural end. And at precisely the moment when the aberration was going to begin to come to an end, as China and India were waking up, United States and the rest of the world went to sleep. And as a consequence of that, I think many Americans, you know, forgot the discipline, forgot the lessons of the Cold War, and stopped trying to understand the rest of the world. And so one of the things I try to do as a friend of the United States with my books is to say, hey, why don't you step back and see what the rest of the world thinks? Because most of the world, I can tell you, is not anti-American. Definitely not. But at the same time, they also want to be able to make their own decisions and not be forced to take positions because, you know, you come along and say, hey, your government is not good enough. We have to change and adapt your government. I mean, that's arrogant to tell societies with long histories that you know better than them how they should be governed. And that those sorts of sloppy intellectual habits. Plus, I think one other consequence of the end of the Cold War is that you no longer had big picture strategic thinkers, like, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, even who sort of realized that what you got to do is look at the whole picture and not just look at sections of it. But you lost these big picture thinkers in the United States. And I think that's part of the reason why the United States geopolitically seems to be, relatively speaking, lost in the world.
What do you guys think? Do you have anything to add on top of this conversation? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.